Thank you so much.
We got a fan club working.
I love it.
Where's Steve D'Angelo, man? Get his ass in here.
Folks from Connecticut, there's not many of us, but we are powerful and loud.
Yes.
We do.
Policy makers right here.
So my name is Jason Ortiz. I'm the Executive Director of Students for Sensible Drug Policy, and SSDP is a 501c3 and C4 international organization that seeks to end the war on all drugs. And so we have a very wide mission and cover lots of different things, but we do have lots of different focuses, and I'm going to be talking a bit about cannabis policy today and other drug policy. But just so folks know, we have about 100 chapters in the United States and 30 internationally. We do have an office in DC and Vienna, Austria, and so we actually are incorporated as an NGO under the United Nations, and we'll talk a little bit about the Commission on Narcotics and Drugs that's currently happening right now. But some of the stuff that we do is we provide essential grassroots support. So to our 100 chapters, we have organizing trainings, community organizing 101, how to write policies, how to advocate at your city council. We make sure folks are actually meeting with folks in the field, both in the advocacy and nonprofit space, but also now in the drug industry space, because not just cannabis, but psychedelics as well are turning into a rather large industry. We also want to make sure we're speaking truth to power, making sure students are going to their city councils, to their state legislatures, to Congress, and advocating. It's been a little bit tricky to do that part under COVID, so it has been a difficult moment for student organizing because folks aren't on campuses. We're not allowed to enter the public buildings, the state house buildings, so the vast majority of activism has to happen online. And we all know that activism online has its pros and cons for sure, but it's definitely been a reimagining of how we do organizing in the space because so much is different around how folks are able to socialize or not socialize. But specifically, we also have some really specific programs like our Just Say No program, which is a peer-to-peer education program where students teach other students about healthy drug policies and healthy drug use and making sure if you have friends that are going through difficult drug experiences, that we're able to provide support for those folks in a non-judgmental and supportive way. And so these are a sample of all the different campaigns that we work on because our chapters are able to decide whatever they want to do. We're here to support them. So if you're in Atlanta, Georgia, or Portland, Oregon, you're going to have very different needs and very different focuses. And so we're there to provide support for all of those different places as much as we possibly can. Some of the ones that are on here we'll talk more in depth, but I do want to focus on things like the aerial crop eradication of coca plants in Colombia specifically. We do work at that particular level where here in the United States we fund the dumping of toxic waste all over the rainforest in Colombia, $30 million a year we spend on that. And we decided we wanted to fight back on that because here in the United States we can actually affect our budgets. And in that discussion and in that work, we met the Nasa tribe in Colombia that currently produces coca products that is battling the company Coca-Cola over who is allowed to use the name Coca in their products. Coca-Cola actually sued them in international court. They sued an indigenous tribe of Colombia over the ownership of the word Coca. So the battle over who's allowed to own even the words around drug policy has begun or has been escalated, I should say. So we're gonna start at the international level. Right now is the Commission on Narcotics and Drugs is happening at the United Nations. In 2019, it was said that the United Nations needed to readjust its policies towards cannabis to reschedule cannabis because there is clearly medicinal value. That was introduced as a thrust but did not actually get passed. This year, it was a bit of a focus on Ukraine and Russia and different things. It was a little bit distracting in the geopolitics of all the conversations, even on drugs. Russia was still a focus in a lot of those pieces. So it is still up for something that we need to push on to actually have happen. And just to be 100% clear, all of the legal markets in the United States are in violation of international law. All of them, right? So everyone in this room, everyone in California are international criminals, and we should all band together as international criminals because we're clearly not following the own laws that the United States created and enforced on everybody else, right? And so it is a very bizarre time in international policy where hypocrisy just runs very deep in everything that we do and talk about. But for folks that aren't aware, we do have a UN headquarters in New York. So it is possible for us here in the Northeast to go to New York and push. There is going to be a big event in May, COVID permitting, right? Like all these events always get canceled, but there's gonna be a big event in May specifically around hemp and the push to legalize hemp at the international level. There is already medicinal international commerce that is happening with cannabis. Colombia exports thousands of kilos of cannabis to Germany for the medical markets. Canada is also buying and selling all over the place on the international market. So as all of our countries are in direct violation of international law, we have massive international commerce happening. And so if there was ever a time to make it very clear that the outdated treaties and agreements and all the various laws and regulations that were put on the books are done, like we don't need them anymore, we are literally flagrantly violating our own laws. So SSDP has young folks that go to the United Nations. We had folks physically there for the Commission on Narcotics and Drugs to advocate for youth voices in all the different processes, but also sensible drug policies. And so for us, sensible drug policies are policies that are grounded in science, reason, and compassion. Those are the three main for us. If we look at a law, is this a good law? Is it sensible, right? Has there been science and research to back this approach? That's always the first one, right? Can anybody cite any of the reasons why you think this is a good idea, right? Then reasonableness. Are we using a sledgehammer to try to kill a fly, right? Mass incarceration to deal with drug use is not a reasonable approach to solve that problem. And then lastly, compassion. Is this law being made to help people, to get them better, or is it to punish them, right? And so we don't use punishments, generally speaking, as an approach to help folks deal with addiction or any kind of difficult drug use. So that's the international space. But here in the United States, we still have universities that refuse to change their policies on cannabis, even in legal states. So in New York, and this happens in Connecticut too, although our bill addressed it a little bit, that even after legalization happened, the university still said, we're still gonna kick you out. You're still gonna get suspended, we're still gonna throw you out of university housing, all the laws are gonna remain on the books. And they cite this act, the Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act. And here was an actual article after New York happened where the university did literally cite this act as the reason why they couldn't change their policies. I've had so much interaction with this particular law. So this act really says they have to report crime reporting on university campuses around drugs effectively and have a drug education program. It doesn't say what that program has to be. It doesn't say what it can't be or what it can be. It just says you have to have a program. So universities around the country are using this law and saying that they can't do X, Y, and Z, they can't have harm reduction services on their campus, they can't decriminalize possession on their campus, and that is simply a lie. And we actually met with the Department of Education. There's a specific group called the Clery Group that came out of the Clery Act in the 90s that was about crime reporting, and that is what covers that. We met with them. They said, no, we don't find nobody for any of those things that you're talking about. Any program that's on a campus, we don't care. As long as they report their crimes appropriately, like we have no interest in finding people. So even in legal states like New York, our university policies have to change, our Department of Children and Families policies need to change, and it doesn't mean that they automatically change when legalization happens. So we're simply trying to get a clarification of this law, similar to what the Cole memo was, right? That said the federal government will intervene in medical states. We want the same thing. We want a Cardona memo,
Yeah,
Miguel Cardona,
Come
yeah,
on, baby.
right? The Cardona memo that says the Department of Education will not penalize universities for adopting harm reduction education, right? Like that is the pure ask that we're making of them. If we're able to do that, that means it opens up those programs for everyone and every school in the nation. And that is a huge shift in how universities handle drug use and drug abuse and drug policy on their campuses. So this is one particular act that is very important as a specific thing that could be a small change. It's not even changing the act, it's actually just clarifying it, that could have radical consequences. And so, as a person that was arrested in high school, I was supposed to be denied financial aid to go into college. I did eventually get to go to the University of Connecticut because folks like yourself, folks that came before us, changed the Higher Education Act's federal aid elimination penalty. It's a long one. That penalty said if you got arrested, you didn't get financial aid. But before I had to go to college, people changed it and said only if you got arrested while in college, while you're on financial aid, would you lose your financial aid. That small tweak meant everyone arrested in high school could now go to college. So I want to just emphasize the importance of like small changes to big laws because it can really radically change people's lives. And I was able to go to college, was able to join SSDP as a student, and now we're here legalizing drugs at the front lines. I'm going to go to state policy and shift a little bit away from cannabis. There is a lot of psychedelic policy going on right now. I don't know if folks have been paying attention, but there is a tremendous amount of for-profit entities that are forming to patent psychedelic therapies to get psychedelic therapies approved by the FDA. When something gets approved by the FDA as a clinically approved therapy, they are able to then sell that therapy to clinics across the nation, and it can be covered by insurance. The amount of money that you can get by having insurance programs that only you own that can access Medicaid and Medicare is in the many billions and billions of dollars. So think about in cannabis, we have 20 big companies and 1,000 small ones. If there was one company that owned the rights to sell cannabis to every retailer, right? That is a massive monopoly. And that is exactly what is about to happen in psychedelics. There are two companies. One of them is a great friend of the movement. One is not. MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, is currently in stage 4 clinical trials on MDMA therapy for PTSD. Highly likely to get approved. I hope they do. They're a fantastic organization, and that could happen this year. And so if that happens, we could have regulated MDMA therapy in 2022 accessible to all kinds of folks in the nation, right? And so, of course, they're also going to be benefiting financially from that, and so the rest of the sector is watching, and so another company, Compass Pathways, is trying to do the same thing, but for psilocybin, the active ingredient in mushrooms. And so they, however, are anti the movement. They say we should not decriminalize anything. The people in the streets trying to give you drugs are crazy, and you should not trust them. So they are very, over-medicalization of psychedelics is definitely happening to the point where it is being patented and profitable and very, very restrictive, and you can actually access it. So in Illinois, for example, there's a bill that's very specifically to legalize psilocybin therapy. It creates a board of physicians to decide the exact regulations. In Colorado, you have two competing measures. One is about very specific therapy legalization. So if you have a particular illness or a particular background of somebody that was a first responder, you would be able to access psilocybin therapy specifically, and other drug therapies could be added by the board in the future. The second ballot measure, which is being directed more by Decrim Nature, simply decriminalizes possession of psychedelic plants and medicines, and that's it. So it just says if you use it, you will not be penalized. The other bill says you can only use it in an approved setting. And so they are not necessarily contradictory, but the movements are trying to do very different things. And that is creating personality conflicts. And I think that's one of the biggest barriers at this point with psychedelic therapy, whether or not we are putting decriminalization front and center, or are we putting access to therapy front and center. And there are very different viewpoints of when and who should go first, but they don't necessarily have to compete. You can have both pass. And that's the interesting thing as SSDP, we support both of them. We think both would be great. We do focus primarily on decriminalization efforts, but if they both pass, that's fantastic. If only one passes, I would want it to be the decriminalization one, but I think that if we can get folks to work together, that would be the ideal situation. In Michigan, we have the Michigan Initiative for Community Healing. It's a statewide ballot measure to fully decriminalize plants and fungi and defelonize all drugs. So this is where SSDP got Decrim Nature to come over onto the all drugs side of it, and basically reducing all of the really extreme penalties to 1 year maximum. So in Michigan, there is life sentences for drug possession. There is also this thing called lifetime probation, which didn't even know that was a thing, and it's the most horrible way to punish somebody, to give them lifetime probation. You can never mess up again or you're going back in jail, is just wild to me. So it would get rid of that. It also removes drug checking equipment from the definition of paraphernalia, so folks can test their drugs. One of the biggest struggles we have as youth right now, that's one of the number one things they ask for, is the ability to check their drugs. Yeah. Obviously, if you're going to be partying, you may or may not want certain drugs, right? But you definitely don't want to have to ingest the ones you're unaware of and not know what it is. And so this is basic access to information and knowledge, and we're denying young people basic information about what they're putting in their bodies. It is a really messed up thing to force on young people to say you can't know what you're actually doing, right? Especially in an academic sense, it's the most anti-academic way to approach it possible, is to tell someone that you can't even investigate what it is. So ours was simply remove it from the definition of paraphernalia, so it is now legal. In Connecticut, actually, this bill just passed out of the Department of the Health Committee, and Anwar supports it apparently because there was no opposition, to legalize assisted therapy for both MDMA and psilocybin. And this is a really interesting one. It allows very particular groups to access the therapy. That's going to get interesting: first responders and those from disproportionately impacted communities.
Veterans?
And I like that. What does it mean? Right? like how are we defining that? Who gets to be included, who doesn't? Why not just everybody? Right? And so this is a good thing. It is passing. I'm really surprised that in Connecticut we're pushing it. It came out with like very little opposition. But whether or not we want to take such narrow approaches to access to therapy is up for debate, right? Like in my opinion, we don't necessarily have to make it so narrow in order for it to pass. You can make the argument that first responders will be able to access this while also letting everybody else access it, right? So this is something that is definitely coming, but I do want to just double hit on the point that FDA approval is the route that most of the companies are going. That is a different thing than trying to pass a congressional bill to decriminalize something. It is very possible that we'll have a very highly capitalized market for psychedelic therapy and still keep all the criminalization on the books. And that is something I'm concerned about. So on the more local level with SSDP, we've actually introduced our own model resolution to decriminalize all drugs. And so the idea here is we wanted to give every student in the country a chance to just cut to the chase and talk right at the root of the problem that prohibition simply does not work. And this resolution lets you do that in Los Angeles or in Hartford, Connecticut or in Boston, Massachusetts, and you can adapt it for your local area. One of the major things we wanted to address in this is the collateral consequences of the war on drugs. Things like, how do emergency responders operate in a legal environment? If drugs are no longer a crime, are we still asking police to intervene in mental health situations? So in our resolution, we say no. We also want to make sure that parents are no longer having to go through difficult experiences with the law if they possess cannabis and could potentially lose their children. This still happens all over the place. Student rights. If you are a university student and you live on campus and it is legal to possess cannabis, to lose your housing because you're possessing a legal substance is ridiculous. Still happens all over the country, right? So we're giving young folks the opportunity to just go right to their city councils and give themselves rights through the law that their police of that municipality can no longer penalize them for these things. And of course, a resolution doesn't change everything. You need ordinances, you need to really dig into the details, but this is a good starting point for folks. And we did already have one group in Ann Arbor, Michigan, recently had their press conference. They announced that they were going to start the movements to get it all done as Ann Arbor, as Michigan in general is talking about on a state level. So we are moving out of the West Coast into the Midwest, getting things done, although Ann Arbor was actually the first city to decriminalize cannabis, from what I understand. So Michigan is a good place to push things along. And then I'll just last say a few folks. These are folks that have been supporting our work from the beginning. Nissen Code, Evan Nissen is an SSDP alumni who went on to do amazing work. He actually worked with Whoopi Goldberg and her products for a long time. I'm really excited to have him. Weed Maps, GTI, and Greenberg Corporate Council have been helping us out for a long time. And then, yeah, this is the different ways that you can get in touch with us. We're always happy to get more folks to figure out how we can partner together, different programs, forums, and different issues. We have lots of different ways that we talk about different things. And if there are any young people in your lives that you know that are on a university campus, you don't have to technically be on a university campus, but that's tending to be who we recruit. Please have them get in touch with us. We're always happy to support folks. We have lots of people here. My friend Jake Plowden is the Northeast director. He's a great guy from New York, happy to help folks. And as always, we're here to figure out what are the best, most sensible laws moving forward. We got to think about the impacts at the international level, all the way down to city councils, having to address things like student codes of conduct for elementary schools, right? So there is a tremendous amount of different drug policies happening all across the country. And we want to make sure that folks start taking as progressive of a look of how we can do things as possible. And so if you know better laws or better places that are really advancing certain things, harm reduction programs, psychedelic therapy access, figuring out how to have non-police-based community interventions into difficult operations, like we definitely want those examples because we can then put them in our model policies and share them with the world. So thank you all so much for checking in, and definitely if anybody has any questions on specific policies or anything going on at the federal and national level, happy to answer it.
Do you have them at law schools?
Yeah. I think we have. So the question is, do we have law school chapters? So master's degree in higher is the fastest growing segment of our chapters. So we have a lot of law schools. I think it's 12 law schools. And I think like not quite in the double digits, but the social work schools have been hitting us up the most. And so actually in Ann Arbor, Michigan, when they produced that resolution, it was a group of social work students. We have one at the UConn School of Social Work at UConn. Zach Green recently testified on the psychedelic therapy piece. And so yeah, but it's doctors, law schools have been there for a minute, but now more into the social services side, figuring out how we can help them draft community investment policies and all of the other stuff related to support services.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm from Providence, and we have been a very progressive city.
Yeah.
Trying to be, and I work for the city. I'm a municipal worker. Do you work with younger folks? Because we have a really active high school group there, the Providence Student Union, who does a lot of work around abolition. And this, I think, would be great to connect them to this work. I wanted to ask about drug testing.
Sure.
This is something just a regular person, I never even heard of this before. And we hear all the time about kids dying, or people dying from fentanyl and all of that. Would this be something that could help people manage,
Absolutely.
just help people manage poisoning themselves, essentially?
It will dramatically reduce the amount of unintended overdoses, right? Some folks are looking for certain drugs, right? And so that's a different thing that we have to address in a different way, right? They're seeking that for whatever reasons they are. Yeah. But at bare minimum, the college environment, right, is not one that is particularly well tested when it comes to drug use, right? Like you're getting from whoever, from the other person, and so by the time you hit the point of consumption, it's past many hands, right? And so as a group, this is why SSDPers, I think, are really important. At a party, someone might say, did you check that? Right? And if you could easily just check it and be like, I don't know if you really want to do that, you could have saved somebody's life with 3 minutes of effort, right? In many states, including Connecticut and I think Massachusetts, it's illegal to possess a drug checking kit. It's actually considered part of manufacturing. Yeah, it's an escalating charge. Like it's worse than simple drug possession. And so this is where, again, we are criminalizing people trying to help reduce the impact of the problem, right? So there are a lot of different laws there. There are also places that will send you them for free, like if you want them. But because it has to go through the mail, there's all kinds of interesting issues there. Yeah, you can use UPS. Like they find ways to do it, and folks are, obviously it's an overdose crisis right now. So anything we can do to help, right? And so fentanyl test strips are the more portable way to address fentanyl specifically, but it's a little bit more. They can get broken, they can get ruined. It's not as exact kind of thing, but yeah, it will without a doubt help folks not ingest things that they're not wanting to, or at the potency that they want to. And that's really what happens is when folks take more or something else than they intended, that there's serious consequences. But New York State, it's fully decriminalized. So think about that. That means young people that go to college in New York are less likely to die from overdose than if they live in Connecticut or Massachusetts, right? And so that's not a sensible approach to reducing overdose deaths, right? And it's simply something that they just have to say we're not going to criminalize, right? If they just stop penalizing it, the test kits will flood to those who need them. But right now, we have to literally have campaigns at the federal level to force state-by-state changes.
Ridiculous.
Yep.
Hear, hear.
I agree, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and then your first question was about younger folks, and so the Just Say No program is specifically geared to high school and college students. It's other high school and college students that get trained to do that, or recent high school graduates. And we have had some high school chapters, although it is difficult for them to deal with their admin usually, and the leeway on what high school students are able to do is a little bit different, but we do have educational resources. And we would hope that if we do get the Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act amended, they would adopt a program like Just Say No as the official educational program for the nation, right? That it should be peer-led, based in science, reason, and compassion, and it is a better approach than DARE. This is our flip side to DARE, and very much this is what the actual drugs do, what the information is, and how young folks deal with it in their current lives. The other big piece of it is that the drugs change, right? MDMA was becoming a popular drug at the end of my college time, but folks that came 10 years before me, it was something different, and like fentanyl was not a problem when I was in college, right? And so, but there was, opiate-based pill issues, right? And so all of those different things have different responses, right? So especially things like drug testing, like to see if you are, your urine is having metabolites in it, that is more effective for certain drugs than others. Right, so enforcement will dictate use, right? Like if we say we're going to strongly criminalize cannabis because you can get tested anytime and get kicked out of sports, but you're not going to get tested for cocaine. Right, exactly, and so I think that's another thing that like our policies are forcing some of these really difficult situations.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that is a peer-to-peer.
Yep, the Just Say No program, and Bill Marie Ferguada Narlock is actually our director of drug education.
I'm not going to write that down.
Yeah. If you go ssdp.org.
Yeah. Okay.
There
You
you
can
go.
see it all there. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing, wherever y'all live in your towns, you're gonna have to do the work there, whatever you want it to happen. If you want it to be more progressive, if you wanna open a business, you're gonna have to deal with all kinds of business law and zoning, right? So don't think this war is over by any means. Like, we have just gotten to the battlefield, and it has the money, right? Like, the big money to come in is going to recriminalize a lot of what we've already done. As my homies from Connecticut know, they already are trying to add a criminal penalty of jail time for gifting cannabis. We just legalized last year, they're already coming back to recriminalize it this year. So, we have no space to rest on our laurels at all. We have to push every single time, every single government we can, and hopefully we'll get up to be a more sensible society eventually. Awesome, thank you. All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.